Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tuesdays with Trailblazers, brought to you by TechEdge AI, the video podcast where we bring you the latest trends and insights in AI and technology. I'm your host, Sadesh, and today we have with us Jonathan Douglas, head actuary at Naya. He has demonstrated history of working with large organizations and complex labor relations. He also has a strong record of delivering financial results to broad audiences to seek understanding, alignment, and support. So without further ado, let's welcome Jonathan. Hey Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Very well, thanks, Harry.
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Well, we're quite excited to see what wonderful insights you have for us. So yeah. So before we actually jump in, Jonathan, into health benefits and I want to start with you. You've spent years working at the intersection of data, risk, and human decision making, right? So for people who may know you as an actuary, but not your full journey, what originally drew you into this space and what keeps you interested in how people actually make choices around health and well-being today?
Great question. I feel like I get that quite a lot because I actually wanted to be an actuary when I was fairly young. And the reason why was the intersection of math, statistics, and most of all, problem solving. And if you really think about where the broad market is these days, there are very few more complex areas than healthcare. And so I started off as a healthcare actuary working with insurance. I've also spent a fair amount of my career being on the consulting side and some time on the employer side as well. And most recently gotten into the startup space. And really what it's allowed me to do is sort of demonstrate the decision-making human behavior aspects of math, if you will, and problem solving and risk. And I say that I've probably worn a bunch of different hats, but when it comes down to it, problems that I started off solving 25 years ago in the benefit space are really the same problems we're facing today. The difference is the technology that enabled us to help solve it. I really wish that even 5 years ago, I had access to a small fraction of the tools that we have today to make what once used to be very complex, time intensive processes much more streamlined, so we can get about the business of actually working with people, talking to people, helping solve their problems, and not sitting buried in spreadsheets and SaaS programs and other things that sort of drive the underpinning behind the benefit space. So, happy to have these conversations because I think this will also help maybe alleviate some concerns that people have around what happens in the background around benefits and why companies such as NIA are really trying to help solve the problem rather than add more complexity to the space.
Got it. And we're talking about health benefits, right? So when people are choosing health benefits, we often assume that they're comparing costs and coverage rationally. But in your experience, what emotional factors tend to influence these decisions more than logic or, let's say, price?
I mean, as an actuary, I have to say, we tend to model benefits expecting people to make the rational choices. You know, low premiums for healthy people, comprehensive plans for the people who are like high utilizers of healthcare. But I think we know the reality is that human decisions are not always made based on expected value. And a lot of it actually comes down to the fear of the unknown. Like this what if anxiety causes a lot of people to really pivot to like that catastrophic event, right? People think about over insuring themselves really against these things that are like in the actuarial space we call low frequency, high severity events, like a major surgery or a cancer diagnosis, expensive drug regimen, or maybe even just, going to the emergency room a couple times a year. So they choose, the really rich plan with a really high premium, not because they need that benefit, but because they fear that one single massive unexpected bill might actually bankrupt them, which is, a rational point of view to have. But there's also a lot of research that shows that consumers consistently overestimate the risk of these rare events, leading them to choose suboptimally. So, the fear is one, but I'd say there's also two other factors that are really important in this. And one is like maintaining the status quo, where people often keep the same plan year after year, even when their life situation changes. And they do this because, let's be honest, evaluating the alternatives is hard. Most people actually would be probably better off considering another plan, but making that change is hard to do, even when maybe say a cheaper plan is better for them. And the second one is like this perception that if my employer is providing me like with a really expensive benefit, that's a better benefit, right? That reflects the value that the employer is placing upon them. And so the cheaper ones are seen as like budget options or not as good. So really, when you think about it, when you combine like this rational fear, inertia, and perceived value weighting all against them, that they're competing against this logic and cost. And I just want to be clear, like I call these emotions rational because life is predictable, like things happen. And the key is whether a person actually has the tools to sort out all these considerations and make a sound choice that works for them. In the vast majority of the time right now, the answer is no, they don't have the right tools to help them make those decisions.
And when it comes to health benefits, we sometimes see many organizations struggle with a lot of things. What's the biggest gap you see between how employers design health benefits to how employees actually use them?
So the simple answer here is a difference in expectations on how people actually use benefits. There is and really always has been like a fundamental difference between how HR and benefits teams design the benefits and people how they actually use them. And that's not to say that HR is not caring or understanding about the employees they serve. In fact, it's usually quite the opposite.
True.
But they also have, company objectives, competitor objectives, industry objectives that they need to harmonize with, and usually under very tight budgets to operate under. So at the same time, sort of demonstrating value and savings to leadership. So what you end up is really two sources of this gap. One is that the wrong benefits are introduced, and the second is that the benefits, even if they are in demand, are just not well utilized. So like the first one, I think there was a hub survey that came out last year that talked about that while most employers were really focused on compensation and benefits, that most employees actually rank things like flexibility and work life much more higher. And so while one could argue that's not an either or situation, there's clearly a value misalignment, the design side and the usage side. So that's sort of one, the wrong benefits. The second one is that employers, they may design benefit programs around solving problems like musculoskeletal issues or chronic diseases, but people just have a really difficult time trusting them, using them. So just think, for instance, like right now, the mental health crisis that we continue to face in this nation, right? A lot of legislation is focused on targeted improvements, and employers have dramatically expanded mental health benefits, both the traditional ways that we think about mental health benefits as well as things like EAPs and teletherapy. But utilization in those programs is still really low. So there's a market investment difference where employees are still struggling to cut some of those stigmas and navigate them effectively. So with all that said, like, is there an easy solution here? Like, I wish the answer were yes. Like, companies need to just take a hard look at their benefit package and not as a series of individual benefits, but that's not really easily done in a world of limited resources. And our departments, they can address only a few things every year. If everything's on a 3 to 5 year cycle, they rarely have the time or ability to stop and consider how everything fits together. So they're just kind of kicking the can down the road. So that gap has always existed, will probably continue to exist until we start looking at things in a much more holistic basis.
Makes sense. I mean, love your take on that one. Now, we're talking to the head of actuary. It wouldn't make sense if we didn't speak about data, right, within benefits. When we talk a lot about data in benefits, such as usage patterns, let's say demographics, even life events, from your perspective, which data signals are genuinely the most valuable when it comes to improving how people choose and use their benefits?
Yeah, you mentioned things like demographics, utilization, life events. Those are table stakes right now. No longer cutting edge, those are table stakes. And for decades now, we've really focused a lot on the aggregation of those data points, which is useful for patterns over large populations. In a vacuum, it's, I guess, academically interesting, especially for insurance companies. By itself, I actually find it to be some of the least valuable signals we have, kind of reflective of everybody, yet nobody in particular. So I would contend that the greatest value we have now is in analyzing behavioral data. And when I say that, let me give you a couple of examples of what provides some very high value. So one is like a life event recognition, right? So analyzing your demographic data against life stage predictions, and say, upper 20s, married, reduces the contribution suddenly to a 401k. So there's a signal there that says they probably have a change in some sort of income or family status. So this could allow, say, HR to proactively offer reminders or resources, such as maybe student loan repayments that you haven't considered prior. Not only that, you can actually tailor the messaging to a specific person based on their situation. and potentially have context to other data. So like that could be one signal. A second one could be chronic condition predictive modeling. So using claims data with clinical results to predict where claimants are going to be. So if an AI model happens to flag a small group of people or diabetes adherents, you can immediately then turn around and deploy like a high touch targeted chronic care management solution to them without really having to sift through the data and consider sort of what the ramifications are. And the third, probably where the biggest component of AI happens to be right now is what we call micro engagement. It's like tracking the digital breadcrumbs from what an employee, what page on a benefit space they happen to click on, what support queries they happen to ask when they have questions, whether they finish a particular module or survey, and maybe which benefits they didn't choose and why. So this helps us kind of talk more about intent and standing before those critical events occur, so that you feed that into the system, and the next time around you actually have a predictive model. But I say all that with the caveat that like this is not either or. Like the power is in combining these pieces together. It's like for instance, where you have all the individual instruments, right? Each one in and of itself can be enjoyable and unique, but when you all play together, like to play a score together, you produce something that's actually much richer, more complex, and more profound in a way that the individual elements just can't really achieve.
Got it. Now, this conversation wouldn't, be completed if we didn't include the latest buzzword, that's AI, right? So AI is everywhere in benefits conversations, but sometimes it feels abstract. So where does AI actually deliver the value for employees today, not just employers or administrators?
Yeah, right now, the most powerful value for AI right now is not in sort of assessing strategy and high level pieces. It's really in eliminating or addressing some of the administrative friction in the benefit space. Valuable because task focused AI is far more trustworthy right now than sort of the open ended interaction that comes to most people's minds when they think about it. And I say for now because these things are changing by the week and by the month. I think right now, sort of the task focused agentic AI is really well positioned risk reward scale compared to other areas where we might say need far more human involvement. So I'll kind of give you two examples of like the work that we do at NIA. First one is around personalized assistance. So I'm going to disambiguate that from say like care navigation, which in my experience I've found to have like some distinct benefits, but also a lot of perverse motivations. Like what I'm talking about here is like virtual assistance that delivers immediate context-aware answers. So instead of waiting for an HR department for 48 hours to answer a question, a person in the middle of the night can look up something like, is my physical therapist in my network for a PPO, and get an instant definitive answer, because you know that can just cut the processing time, leading to people who are generally more satisfied with and less frustration. But that sounds simple enough, but the solutions really aren't created equally here. Like, how many times have you, say, encountered a customer service chatbot where you enter in this like circular loop and only say like limited choices, and then you kind of end up back where you started, and maybe got only peripheral knowledge of what you were actually looking for? Like most people have encountered these, and these are like more virtual demonstrations, like the old telephone trees, really just put into a virtual space. And it's totally suited for how people want to interact with systems. Like what I'm talking about is like real interaction, supported by vast arrays of data that understands nuance and tone, is actually helping informing perspectives, like real perspectives. Like that's a differentiation between AI. Anybody can generate AI software. Having a perspective that's worth registering and listening to, and not just sort of amplifying and deflecting the situation, is actually what's the key. So like that's the first that we're working on. The second is proactive recommendation and plan optimization. So during enrollment, AI can say, analyze your claims, your financial situation, your preferences, like your personal preferences that you may have, and recommend bundles that better match your predicted needs. So AI moves the employee past like that confusing jargon of like cost, and adds context and explainability. But there also has to be things like memory. What have you already told me that's relevant? And some sort of tracking mechanism, like how can I follow your progress to see what actually happened, eliminate some of the pitfalls and learn from that experience. So right now, most models are highly acute in nature. They're only really engaged when a person needs to make a critical decision, or like a significant event has occurred, you really hear feedback for like the 95% of people that have a really good experience, but you really hear a lot about like that 5% that goes really poorly, which causes a flurry of activity. So AI tools right there can be very useful, but only to the extent that you can provide like a valuable perspective to the data. And that separates the good AI tools for like from like the off-the-shelf LLMs that are out there in the wild these days.
Now, we spoke about data, we spoke about AI, right? And we all know that with more data and AI comes more responsibility. So, what guardrails need to be in place to make sure AI actually supports well-being without, introducing bias, overreach, or unintended consequences?
Yeah. I would actually expand the term guardrails to actually encompass the overall concept of governance, which I consider to be pretty mandatory in this space. Like as an actuary, I focus on risk. And in this case, algorithmic bias is a massive legal and ethical risk, not to just mention it can generate a very poor product. So this gets heightened as the stakes of the AI decisions get higher as well. So the approach I propose to take, kind of encapsulates what we call responsible AI, which, amongst
Mhm.
other things, necessitates like a few key considerations, like a human in the loop process. So my position is like no AI system, regardless of its sophistication, should ever make final decisions that result in sort of high risk adverse impacts without some sort of level of um, independent review and override authority by humans. So this allows us to preserve that human judgment, especially in high stakes HR decisions. Furthermore, like the knowledge base itself, what any tool would operate under, um, has to have guardrails that are consciously set to ensure that there's a credibility and resilience to the tool. Like that's one. Second is, seems pretty obvious, and that's just regular testing and auditing, right? So they have to be tested for accuracy, bias, as you mentioned, not only when they're created, but during deployment as well. For instance, if the underlying data and knowledge base show that, say, one demographic group is consistently getting a different recommendation for a benefit, the AI has to not simply learn to recommend, say, different coverages unless it's based on the merit of the entire model. Like otherwise, AI really runs the risk of like perpetuating and amplifying historic biases. I'll give you a for instance, because I do this on a regular basis. Every month, I chance all the LLMs to kind of say, how would it help me make a decision about my benefits? So I actually even recently plugged in, um, tell me which of my medical plans suited to me with two conditions. One is as somebody who is African American and as somebody who is Caucasian. The two answers were actually quite different. Now, one can debate sort of the merits of it because a lot of it was sort of based on statistics, which I happen to agree with, but it gave different patterns of recommendations with different explanations simply based on entering that particular information. Like the first one, it focused on like diversity, health equity accreditation, health condition expertise. Matter really focused on financial tolerance for savings plans and centers of excellence and lifestyle and chronic medications. Like those are relevant, but doesn't really encompass a person. So even on the summarized level, when you enter in certain information, you can get very different results, which may or may not actually be most appropriate for you. And the fact that it's generating the results means that it self feeds itself to produce those same sorts of answers again and again. What we try to do on our type of tooling is making sure that the merits are really worthwhile talking about rather than sort of assessing a person for what they say it is, and giving an answer just based on what historical knowledge it may have on it. So again, that's the second. The third one is just transparency and explainability. So people just need to be informed when AI is assisting them and how it's making the decision. So if it recommends something to you, it needs to tell you why it's happening. It's black box. And this helps build adoption. For instance, if a person tells you that they really want that medical plan with high protection and is willing to pay a higher premium for it, but the high deductible health plan that's cheaper is actually better for them. You have to help reconcile those two pieces. You told me this, but I think this one is actually better. Like that's actually where we find a lot of friction these days is between telling people and explaining to them why, even though what they said may be different than what we might recommend, being able to support them because most people want to feel like they have some sort of support in the decision that they're making, helping to convince them about what their decision is right, whether or not they had that preconceived notion or not. So again, It's about balancing those emotions and utilization gaps that we just talked about with those data signals to really add value to the situation.
I mean, wonderful insights out there. Quite a different take, I would say, and I've not heard about. But yeah, quite a wonderful take on that one. So now let's make this practical, right? So if employers could take just one step today to improve how people select and use their health benefits, what should that step be, and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, of course, like every actuary, right? I'm gonna put a little nuance to this. I think there's like a 1A and 1B answer to this. So like all data are assets, right? Both to the people who generate them and to those who could potentially use them. The only way to like really make use of them is to centralize all these disparate sources and make effective use of them. So I'd tell employers really these two things. One is like find the tools that consider the and integrate your data and solutions cohesively. I propose that AI is a great way to exponentiate the power with limited additional resources if done properly. So one is find the cohesive nature. AI is a great tool for that. The second one, which kind of seems obvious, is to take action. It doesn't have to be everything all at once, but you need to have the conviction to take meaningful and logical steps to harness the new power of data in AI. So build in your guardrails, get the monitoring, have fallbacks if needed, but take those logical steps going forward. So if you're in a position to design benefits for employees, and I've worked in this space for decades now, it's no longer acceptable to just tweak deductibles and copays and call it good. No longer good enough to say renegotiate your PBM contract and call it good. You
True.
can't just implement a care navigation solution and expect it to make people healthier and to save you a bunch of money. And to be clear, those things have value themselves, but they're nothing new. 2 decades ago, I was doing these things, and look where we are now. Like the situation is even worse because things are far more costly. People are in worse health than they used to be. It's causing a lot of stress and anxiety in people. It's like we have to think differently. And because the cycles of benefits, as you probably know, are long, they're like 12 months or sometimes 24, 36 months or even longer. If you're not doing that now, what's that going to look like in 12 months when you decide that it's time to take a look at it? Incremental steps you can take right now. The key is to really jump in. I go back to the fact that even 5 years ago, when I was working for an employer and trying to understand how we could drive targeted health solutions to certain cohorts of populations, I'd be poring over data, trying to find patterns, trying to do analysis. These things would take days and weeks to put together. I could do that probably in 15 to 20 minutes using AI right now and probably get even better results because it happens to pick out the things that I would have missed as just being a human. Leverage those tools to help me inform a perspective that helps drive those decision making forward. That is very different now, very different even this year than it was last year. People need to be able to, again, find the solutions that take that data together and then take some sort of action on it.
So we usually see that, benefit decisions happen once a year, right? So, and we don't think about them again post that year. So do you see AI kind of, helping shift benefits from a once a year event to a continuous driving experience?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people would love for benefits to be sort of a set it and forget it type of thing, but we know that life really doesn't work that way. Many benefit decisions may be made on a year basis. People have to live with them the other 364 days. But I'll take it even like one step further. Models that only look at one or a few events are really not long for this world. And AI is going to be their executioner here. Because you asked, like, to me, the future looks like a lot more just-in-time benefits models. So that people, a lot of things, what comes to their mind is the car manufacturing industry, right? They've been doing this for decades, but healthcare hasn't had the ability to do it really until now, mostly because of technology. Like we talked about before, how much it's really on the cusp of something different right now. For instance, if an AI model can detect signs of financial strain, like reduction in what you enroll in from a benefit cost perspective, it could trigger communication to maybe a related benefit that the person is eligible for, like behavioral health. Like this is something that we really haven't had the capability of doing until recently. And the second one is just about having continuous feedback loops where AI platforms will be designed to monitor the activity, the life events, the benefit changes year round. And so a person doesn't have to remember all these steps in their life. So if something happens, an AI model can instantly recognize it, address it, get the feedback, and move on and then create that continuous loop so that it's building that reflex into the future iterations of itself. I found over the past few decades, the biggest hurdle to engagement isn't that people don't want to engage, that they don't know how. So
True.
what we're doing is like automating the awareness and the enrollment, and that's going to happen every day during the year. And well, we're using these data points and actions again to power the next generation. So it's a real learning opportunity here. So it's like fast, it's personalized, and it's ongoing. So the main obstacles to that, of course, are trust and preserving the data security. Like we sort of talked about that earlier. Those key concepts have to be essential in how it's done. But the why it's done is, pretty obvious to me. And to your point, it is going to be a continuous type of effort.
Got it. And if you were to bring the crystal ball out there, understand that what are some changes we can expect within, the health benefit side of things and how AI is going to impact it. So let's say, for example, if we were to consider the next 5 years or what next 10 years, what's your opinion about how things are going to drastically change?
The optimistic side of me would say that the proliferation of AI in the clinical space, so for physicians to be able to actually use AI to synthesize a number of different claims-based data with clinical data in a way packaged together and usable outside that sphere, will really help power a lot more responsive ways to treat health overall. Right now, part of that challenge is that when a physician writes a handwritten note, it's really hard to systematically sort of create a uniform standard for that's usable outside of sort of the physician's notes themselves. If AI, what they can do is sort of harness that together in a way that's actually quantifiable and used as a data point. Right now, that's kind of lacking. When you do that really helps a lot. I'd say, like, similarly, because I've talked a lot about healthcare, but on the financial side, being able to create disparate data points around a person's credit, debt, history, along with their financial strains and windfalls, is a way to actually bring some synthesis there. The negative side of the pessimistic side of me says that there's going to be a lot of players in this space, and they're going to come and go, and it's going to be very difficult to figure out which ones to latch onto, which ones will have staying power, and which ones won't. It sort of harkens back to the earlier question that you sort of asked about sort of what should people be looking for, and also, in general about, which companies are going to survive, which ones may not. It's going to be the ones who are really taking advantage of the opportunities here. And a lot of people can do it. It's just a matter of, are there going to be a lot of copycats out there, and which one is going to provide that unique perspective overlay to the tool that actually has impact on engagement and activation within a particular product. Like, we've seen a lot of them sort of happen to transform a lot in the past couple of years. Everybody's talking about AI. That's a good thing. I love that people are doing that. But right now, there's not a whole lot of substance behind a lot of those claims. So to me, it's going to be, I'd say in the next 6 months, you're going to see a lot of companies start to actually put out real life results from what they've started to generate. I think in 5 or 10 years, you're going to see a lot of those sort of transform themselves and into real pillars of how we think about benefits overall, and really fit into our everyday lifestyle, the ones that sort of fit more seamlessly and think about it the least. Like, I think about, if I want to purchase something, even if I don't purchase from Amazon, Amazon comes to mind, right? It's got to be in the benefit space. Who's going to be that logo? And I know it's, a cliched example, but who's going to be the logo that people think about when it comes to formulating a benefits decision? I think there is an answer that could be out there. It's not the sexy thing that everybody's looking for, but we'll find a couple of highlighted that aren't, also cursed under their breath, like some of the insurance carriers, and they've gone through some unfortunate things in the past year or two. But you don't want them to be cursing your name. You want them to be looking at it as like, if I need help, here's the place where I'm going to go.
And because you said it's going to be a competitive space, are you of the opinion that there's going to be a surge of investment around the space as well? Let's say in a couple of years from now?
I think there's going to be investment, but I think it's going to be very cautious. In fact, I think that's already started to happen. I've worked in other startup spaces, and there's a lot of hesitation right now, mainly because I think what they want to see are proof points. Companies that are going to get the investment are the ones who can actually demonstrate that they're doing something different and have tangible results. I think we're still in a bit of a honeymoon period where there's a lot of companies that have received significant investment out there who have yet to sort of really consistently demonstrate positive results. And I'm not just talking about, simple ROI, but that they actually have a differentiated product that people want to engage in and provide sort of that lifetime value aspect that's more than just, multiplying widgets by a cost and that's sort of like that's your maximum market share. So I think what you're going to see is a very competitive space with investment for those who can demonstrate that value consistently and early on. And let's face it, healthcare is a massive, massive sum of money that exists to not invest in companies that have, a really solid play here. But I think people have also been burned a lot in the past too, or invested in companies that just haven't really panned out for one reason or another. So it's going to be a cautious acceleration, but an acceleration nonetheless.
Well, that's all the questions that I had, Jonathan. I think it's a wait and watch game in terms of the investments that you spoke about. You've been really, really, accommodating in terms of making sure that, you had the time for this one. So really appreciate you and thank you so much for giving us the time and, giving us some wonderful insights.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it as well. I would just happen to say because I've reviewed a lot of your existing other podcasts, and I know some of the views maybe aren't where you want them to be, but I actually found them really, really interesting. I'm trying to find ways that we can sort of amplify some of the messages that you brought to some of your other conversations, particularly some of the marketing pieces. They're really actually some very valuable insights that I want to find, a way to sort of synthesize a number of your other podcasts together to kind of make that real for people. Because I think sometimes, especially in the startup space, we're small, right? And finding people with sort of the knowledgeable background can be hard. So finding sources of, valuable insight is really worth its weight in gold, especially for companies of Naya's size. So I will take from this, a lot of learnings too from your podcast, wherever this happens to go, from your other sessions, and, encourage you to hopefully keep on finding other diverse perspectives. Might be good to also get some compare and contrast between, say, like two stakeholders in the same space who might have some differing opinions too, because that's one thing that's often sort of lacking right here. You often hear sort of like the one tone perspective, but actually getting people to cordially banter about certain positions that may be a bit more contentious could also be really helpful, I think, in this space.
Absolutely love people giving us feedback, to be honest, and at the same time share some insights. And thank you so much. Usually we didn't get a lot of people coming in the podcast and sharing these kind of feedbacks and sharing these kind of insights. Yeah, this is something we are actually in the plans of doing this year. Is basically I'll be very honest and truthful about it. The B2B space in itself is, when you look at organic traffic from a B2B standpoint, it's not that great from a YouTube standpoint or a video standpoint.
Right.
If you see every video that's doing good out there, it's mainly individual consumer based, or it's mainly B2C consumer based. When we actually look into B2B, it's pretty much very minimal in terms from a YouTube standpoint or from a exploring standpoint. It doesn't usually go viral. So that's what we've seen, and that's what we've been working on in this year, is to make sure that, amplify as much as possible and reach out to as many people, relevant people. It's not just about reaching out, it's about reaching out to the relevant people as well, making sure that, they're informed about what's happening in this market space, what the leaders have to say about that particular industry space. So that's been our consistent effort, is to make sure we amplify this year as much as possible. Really enjoyed hosting on our podcast Tuesdays with Trailblazers. And thank you all for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, stay tuned with TechAGI for more insights. Till we meet again, signing off, your host, Sidesh.